I never thought the happiest day of my son's life would be the day that destroyed mine. My name is Margaret. And if you had seen me 5 years ago, you would have seen a woman who had everything figured out. A warm home in a quiet suburb. A garden I tended every Sunday morning. A husband of 31 years who kissed me on the forehead before he left for work. 2 grown children who called me every week. I was the kind of woman other women looked at and thought, she has it all together. I wore that image like a crown. I polished it every single day. My husband's name is Gerald Whitmore, a man who walked into rooms and made people smile. He had this laugh, deep, genuine, the kind that started in his belly and worked its way up. People trusted Gerald. Neighbors trusted him. His colleagues trusted him. His children adored him. And me? I built my entire world around that man. 31 years. 31 years of shared mornings and quiet evenings and inside jokes, and the kind of comfortable love that feels so permanent you stop questioning whether it is real. Our older son, Daniel, was getting married. Daniel, my firstborn, my gentle giant, the boy who used to bring me dandelions from the backyard and call them bouquets. He had fallen in love with a woman named Serena. They had been together for 2 years. I had only met her a handful of times, family dinners, a birthday celebration, one Christmas where she seemed quiet and a little guarded. I had tried not to read too much into it. Young love is complicated. People take time to open up. I liked her enough. She was beautiful, well-spoken, educated. Daniel looked at her like she hung the moon. I was happy for my son, truly, deeply happy. The wedding was planned for a Saturday in late September. The venue was a converted old farmhouse about 40 minutes outside the city. String lights wound through old oak trees. White chairs lined a grass aisle. Flower arrangements in shades of ivory and dusty rose sat at the ends of every row. It was beautiful. The kind of beautiful that makes you press your hand to your chest because you feel so full you might overflow. Gerald and I arrived early that morning, the way parents do. We helped where we could. We greeted family members we hadn't seen in years. I straightened Daniel's tie and told him he was the most handsome man in the room, and he rolled his eyes the way he always did when I embarrassed him, and I loved every second of it. The ceremony was set to begin at 4 o'clock. Gerald and I sat in the front row on the groom's side. I had a small bouquet of flowers in my hands, cream-colored roses I had picked up for Daniel's boutonniere the day before and had extras of. I sat there in my dusty blue dress, my hair done up the way I used to wear it when Gerald and I went to dinner parties in our 30s, and I felt content, peaceful. I thought to myself, this is what it is all for, all the years, all the work, this moment right here. The music began to play. Everyone rose. I turned the way every mother turns to watch the bride walk in. And that was the moment. That exact, unremarkable, ordinary moment when the world cracked open beneath my feet. Because I was not the one who reacted first. It was Gerald. He was standing right beside me. His hand had been loosely holding mine. And when the doors at the back of the farmhouse swung open and the bride appeared at the end of that flower-lined aisle, I felt his hand go cold. I felt every muscle in his body go rigid. I turned to look at him because I heard it, a sound that was not quite a gasp and not quite a word. Just air leaving his body in a way it had no right to leave. His face had gone the color of ash. His eyes were locked on Serena, on my son's beautiful bride, on the woman who was about to become my daughter-in-law. And in his eyes, in those eyes I had looked into for 31 years, I saw something I had never once seen there before, terror. I squeezed his hand. He did not squeeze back. I whispered his name. He did not move. He stood there, rigid and pale and absolutely silent, staring at Serena as she walked slowly down that aisle in her white gown, holding her father's arm, smiling that quiet, guarded smile of hers. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself he was just moved by the moment. I told myself a lot of things in those next few seconds. I told myself every comfortable lie I had spent years perfecting. But somewhere deep in my chest, in that place women have, that place we try to ignore, that quiet voice we silence because we are afraid of what it knows, something whispered to me, "You are not going to be okay after today," and I should have listened. I always should have listened. The ceremony was beautiful. Daniel cried when Serena walked toward him. She cried when she reached him. They said their vows in voices that shook with emotion. People laughed at the sweet, small jokes in the officiant's speech. Flowers were exchanged. Rings were placed. I cried, of course I cried. I am his mother. But Gerald did not cry. Gerald stood beside me and stared at a fixed point somewhere above the altar and did not speak and did not smile and barely breathed until it was over. And when the officiant said, "You may kiss the bride," and Daniel and Serena kissed and everyone clapped, I felt Gerald's hand finally, slowly release mine, as if he had been holding on for dear life, and had finally accepted there was nothing left to hold. I want you to understand something. I had been a good wife. I want to make that clear before I tell you what came next, because it matters. It matters because women like me, women who fold the laundry and remember the anniversaries and hold the family together with both hands, we are always the last to know. Not because we are foolish, because we choose to believe in what we have built. Because walking away from 31 years of love is not something you do the moment a question appears. You investigate. You give the benefit of the doubt. You protect what you have built. That is what I told myself. That is why I waited. The reception moved inside to a beautiful barn with exposed wood beams and warm lighting. Tables were set with candles and flowers and little card holders with guests' names written in calligraphy. I found my seat. I smiled at relatives. I ate a little. I danced with my younger son, Marcus, who held me and whispered that Daniel looked so happy, and I agreed and I meant it. But all evening I watched Gerald. He barely ate. He drank more than I had seen him drink in years. He avoided looking in Serena's direction unless absolutely necessary, and when he did, when the toasts were made and everyone turned to smile at the bride and groom, I watched his jaw set like stone. At one point, Serena caught his eye across the room. Just for a moment. Just a single second of eye contact between my husband and my new daughter-in-law, and she did not smile. She looked at him with an expression I could not fully read. Not anger, not warmth, something in between, something knowing. And then she looked away. I excused myself from the table. I went to the restroom and locked the door and stood at the sink and looked at myself in the mirror for a long time. My hair was still done. My lipstick was still on. My eyes looked like someone had reached behind them and switched off a light. I asked myself the question I had been avoiding all evening. How does Gerald know my son's wife? I did not sleep that night. I lay beside Gerald in our hotel room. We had booked a room at a nearby inn to avoid driving late. And I listened to him breathe, and I stared at the ceiling, and I thought about that look. That gray, terrified, gutted look on his face when Serena walked through those doors. I thought about the quiet way she had carried herself at our family dinners. The way she never quite relaxed around us. The way she sometimes looked at Gerald with those careful eyes and then looked away very quickly. I had thought she was shy. I had thought she was nervous about making a good impression. I was wrong. 3 days after the wedding, Daniel and Serena left for their honeymoon. 2 weeks in Portugal. They looked golden and happy in the airport photos Daniel sent me, and I smiled at every single one and told him to enjoy every moment, and I meant it, because none of what had happened was Daniel's fault. None of it would ever be Daniel's fault. The morning after they left, I sat across from Gerald at the kitchen table. He was drinking his coffee. I was pretending to read the news on my phone. The morning light came through the window the way it always did. Everything looked exactly the same. And I said very quietly, very calmly, "Gerald, how do you know Serena?" He did not answer right away. He set his coffee mug down, slowly, carefully, the way someone sets something down when their hands are not steady. And then he said, "What do you mean?" I said, "You know what I mean. I watched you at the wedding. I watched your face when she walked in. I watched you all night. I have been watching you for 31 years, Gerald. I know your face. So I am asking you one time. How do you know our son's wife?" The silence that followed was the loudest thing I have ever heard in my life. And then he told me. He did not tell me everything at once. It came out the way these things always come out, in pieces, in fragments, each one worse than the last, each one landing like something heavy dropped from a great height. He had known Serena for 4 years. Not 2. Not since Daniel started dating her. 4 years. They had met at a professional conference in another city. Gerald traveled for work, always had. I had never questioned it. Never once. He had his work and I had our home, and we had always trusted each other with the spaces in between. He told me it had started as a friendship. He told me she was funny and sharp and interesting. He told me they had kept in touch. He told me that eventually, he paused here, and I watched him look at his hands. Eventually it became more than that. I sat very still. He told me it had lasted almost 2 years. He told me he had ended it. He told me it was over long before Daniel ever mentioned her name to us, long before the first family dinner, long before the Christmas, long before any of it. And then he said the words that I think broke something in me permanently. he said. I did not know she was Daniel's girlfriend until the first dinner. By then it was already over between us. I thought she would end things with Daniel. I thought she would walk away. I did not think it would ever come to this. I said, you let your son marry her. He said, I did not know what to do. I said, you let your son marry a woman you were involved with for 2 years and you said nothing. He said, Margaret, I was afraid. I stood up from that table. I picked up my coffee mug, gently, because I am not a dramatic woman by nature. I have never broken things or thrown things, and I walked to the sink and I rinsed it out and I placed it in the drying rack and I said, I need you to leave this house today. He left. And I sat down on the kitchen floor, on the cold tile I had mopped 1,000 times, and I pressed my back against the cabinet and I let myself feel it, all of it. Every single terrible, devastating, humiliating piece of it. I did not cry for Gerald. Not really. I cried for the woman I had been. The woman who had polished that image, that life, that crown, for 31 years. I cried for every moment I had chosen to believe rather than question. I cried for my son, who was somewhere in Portugal right now, laughing on a beach, not knowing that his father and his wife had a history that would destroy everything. I cried for exactly 1 hour. And then I got up off that floor, and I started to think, because here is what I knew. Daniel would come home from his honeymoon in 11 days. He would walk back into his life, his marriage, his future, all of it built on something rotten at the foundation. He deserved to know the truth. He deserved to make his own choice with his eyes fully open. But I also knew that this was not information I could hand to my son like a grenade and walk away from. This had to be handled carefully, thoughtfully, with love, not anger, with truth, not vengeance. Because Daniel was the one who mattered most in all of this. Not my pain, not my pride. My son. I spent those 11 days preparing. I spoke to a lawyer, not about my marriage, not yet, but about what I was legally allowed to do, what documentation I could gather, what I was entitled to know. I spoke to one trusted friend, a woman named Patricia who had known me for 20 years and who sat across from me at her kitchen table and listened without interrupting and then said, whatever you decide to do, I am behind you 100%. I went through 11 years of financial records. I found things. Small things at first, a hotel charge in a city Gerald had claimed was for a work conference. A restaurant charge in our own city on a night he had told me he was working late. A jewelry purchase I had never received anything from. I documented everything. Quietly, methodically, the way I had always done things, with care, with precision, without anyone watching. And then Daniel came home. I asked him to come to the house alone. He came on a Tuesday afternoon, a little sunburned, glowing with that newlywed happiness that was so genuine it made my chest ache. He walked through the door and hugged me and said, Mom, Portugal was unbelievable. You and Dad have to go someday. And I sat him down at the kitchen table. The same table. The same chair. I told him everything his father had told me. I did not editorialize. I did not cry. I spoke slowly and clearly. And I watched my son's face go through the same terrible transformation I had seen on his father's face at that wedding. That same draining of color. That same hollowing out behind the eyes. When I finished, Daniel sat in silence for a very long time. Then he said, Does she know that you know? And I said, Not yet. He asked me what I wanted to do. And I told him, This is your marriage, Daniel. This is your life. I'm not here to make your decisions. I am here because you deserve the truth, and no one was going to give it to you. He left to go home to Serena. I did not hear from him for 2 days. 2 of the longest days of my life. On the 3rd day, he called me. His voice was different. Quiet and careful, the way a person sounds after they have been through something that has rearranged them. He told me he had confronted Serena. He told me she had not denied it. He told me she had said she thought it was over, that she had moved on, that she loved him and had believed starting fresh was possible. He told me he did not know yet what he was going to do about his marriage. I told him that was his right, and I meant it. But here is what I did know. I knew what I was going to do about mine. I filed for divorce from Gerald 3 weeks after that Tuesday afternoon. I did not do it in secret. I did not do it in anger. I called Gerald and I told him, I have spoken to a lawyer and I will be filing this week. I want this done cleanly and fairly and without ugliness because I am not an ugly person. But I will not stay. He asked me if there was any chance. I said no. He asked me if I was sure. I said I had been sure since I watched his face on that aisle. The divorce was not without its difficult moments. They never are. Gerald contested some of the financial terms initially, but I had my documentation. I had 11 years of records and a very composed lawyer and the quiet, unshakable certainty of a woman who knows exactly what she is worth. Within 4 months, we had reached a settlement that was fair. The house came to me. Half of the retirement accounts. A financial arrangement that meant I would not have to rebuild from nothing at 58 years old. Gerald moved into an apartment across town. I heard through mutual friends that he was not doing well. I felt a soft, distant sadness about that, the kind of sadness you feel for a version of someone you used to love. But I did not reach out. Some doors, once closed, must stay closed. As for Serena, that is a more complicated story. Daniel ultimately decided to try to work on his marriage. He and Serena entered counseling. I respected his decision completely, even when it was hard for me to watch. That is what it means to love your children. You let them make their own choices, even the painful ones, even the ones you would not make yourself. Serena came to me about 2 months after everything came out. She knocked on my door on a Saturday morning. She looked as though she had not slept in weeks. She asked if she could come in. I let her in. She sat at that kitchen table, the same chair, the same light, and she apologized to me, not in a small or comfortable way. She looked at me and she said, "I am sorry for what I was a part of. I am sorry for what it cost you. I know that is not enough." I sat across from her and I thought about what to say for a long time. And then I said, "I believe you believe that. And I believe you love my son. And I hope that for his sake you spend the rest of your life being worthy of that love." She nodded. She did not cry, which I respected. She left, and I closed the door, and I stood in my kitchen alone, and I listened to the quiet. There is a particular kind of quiet that belongs to a woman who has come through something and is still standing. It is not an empty quiet. It is full. Full of everything she survived, everything she released, everything she chose to carry forward, and everything she chose to set down. I planted new flowers in my garden that spring. Bright ones, yellows and deep purples, and a climbing rose along the back fence that I had always wanted but Gerald thought was too much work. It was too much work. I did it anyway. I started going to dinner with Patricia on Friday evenings. We laughed. We talked. We split dessert. I could not remember the last time I had split dessert with someone without worrying about whether it was too indulgent or whether someone else might want the last piece. I ate my half without a single apology. Marcus, my younger son, started calling more often. He flew out for a long weekend in April, and we walked along the river path near the house, and he told me he was proud of me. My own child told me he was proud of me. I cannot explain what that did to my heart. Daniel and I found our way back to each other slowly, the way you find your way back to someone after a storm has passed through and rearranged everything. He still called me every week. We still had Sunday dinners when we could manage it. Things between us were different now. More honest somehow, more real. The comfortable distance of a family that never talks about hard things that was gone. What replaced it was something better, something that did not require me to perform. I do not tell this story to be bitter. I want you to understand that. I am not a bitter woman. Bitterness is what happens when you swallow your pain and let it sit. I did not swallow this. I looked at it, every single terrible piece of it, and I said, this is what happened to me. It does not define what happens next. What Gerald did was a betrayal of the deepest kind. Not because he made a mistake, people make mistakes, but because he chose his own comfort over his son's future. He sat in a front row seat at his son's wedding knowing what he knew, and he said nothing. He chose silence to protect himself. And that kind of silence is its own cruelty. But here is what I also know. I spent 31 years making myself smaller to fit inside someone else's story. I kept the house beautiful and the family together and the image polished and the peace maintained. I was good at all of it. I was extraordinary at all of it. And none of it protected me. What protected me, what finally saved me, was the moment I got up off that kitchen floor and stopped waiting to be okay and decided to make myself okay. The moment I stopped asking Gerald for answers and started finding my own. The moment I stopped being the woman in the story and started being the one writing it. That is the only revenge worth having, not the kind that burns someone down. The kind that rebuilds you so completely, so beautifully, that the people who underestimated you have to look away because the light coming off of you is too much to face directly. I am 59 years old. My garden is the most beautiful it has ever been. My house is quiet and mine. My sons both call me every week. I go to dinner on Fridays. I sleep in the middle of the bed. And I am, for the first time in a very long time, exactly who I want to be. If you are sitting somewhere right now holding a truth someone handed you that you did not ask for, I want you to hear me when I say this. You are allowed to grieve what you lost. You are allowed to sit on the floor for a little while, but you are not allowed to stay there. Because the life you deserve is not behind you. It is still ahead of you, waiting, patient, full of flowers you chose yourself and quiet you earned, and a seat at the table where no one gets to decide how much of the dessert you are allowed to have. Get up and go build it.